The Pittsburgh Penguins made a pretty big and surprising move by trading for Rutger McGroarty on Thursday, and Pat and I are going to discuss that and more right after this.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes. You can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Damp. You can follow him on Twitter at Synonym for Wet, and you can follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. Of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen/watch of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So, Pat, today, everyone in Pittsburgh got the blockbuster trade that they've been waiting for. Brayden Yager is a member of the Steelers now. No, just kidding. He's still a member of the San Francisco 49ers as that situation continues to spiral and just really go nowhere. But Kyle Dubas came forward and made a big blockbuster deal of his own, acquiring Rutger McGroarty from the Winnipeg Jets in exchange for Penguins' top prospect, Brayden Yager. I got to say, man, I was stunned when I saw that McGroarty was going to the Penguins. I remember when he was made available around the time of the 2024 NHL draft, I even said, hey, it'd be fun if the Penguins acquired him, but I really didn't think they were going to. Well, Kyle Dubas was kind of like, okay, Hunter, time to shut up now. And overall, man, this is a net win for the Penguins. I obviously am, I guess, a little, what's the word here? I guess stunned that they gave up Brayden Yager, considering how high the organization was on him. But when you have an opportunity to acquire, a prospect as good as McGroarty, you do it. And it helps the team now and into the future. That's the biggest thing here. McGroarty, I think, is ready to play right now. With Yager, he was still, I think, another year, potentially 2 away. Yeah, we were talking about him potentially getting a 9-game tryout, but I still felt like he was probably going to go back to junior this year. But with McGroarty, he's ready to play right now. He signed his ELC per Puckpedia. It's a 3-year ELC. He'll be an RFA in 2027. He can play up and down the lineup. He can play center. He can play wing. There's a chance that we could see him play on Crosby's wing as soon as this season. Maybe that bumps Drew O'Connor down the lineup. We'll get into that a little bit later. But I'm a big fan of this move. You continue to kind of restock the prospect system with quality, and you're also sending the message that we're at least trying to be in the playoff race this year. Those are my immediate thoughts on the move, Pat. What say you?
I'm right there with you on the what this trade signals. The other piece I want to focus on here is just basically the trade itself and not so much the meanings of it. First and foremost, I get it. Brayden Yager was a very fun, very exciting prospect, especially with the way he played in the WHL playoffs, and the Memorial Cup tournament. He was an absolute star this year for Moose Jaw, and there's no two ways about that. But you look at this trade and you think, okay, Rutger McGroarty is one of the better prospects in the league right now. Of all the players who have been drafted into the NHL, who might be on the cusp of joining the league soon, he is among the better ones of it. Now, is he a franchise-altering player? No, let's not get carried away on that. But when you're 20 years old, you finish 7th in NCAA scoring as a 20-year-old sophomore, that's a good player. That's a very good player. Now, when you think about the trade itself, Winnipeg had no leverage here. They had none at all. And the reasoning was he had not signed his ELC with Winnipeg yet. That's why the Penguins signed him to an ELC upon completion of the trade, because he still needed to sign a deal. All Winnipeg had was his rights. There was a very real chance, and you said this to me before the show, because apparently after a year of doing this show together, we've melded into one mind, but there was a very real world where he was just going to walk to free agency as an NCAA free agent. And when Winnipeg's looking to trade him, they have to trade him somewhere he would be willing to sign, because at this point, he could have walked to free agency, like I said. So him coming to Pittsburgh shows that A, there's an opportunity for him to play here, and B, he wanted to be here. That said, until his rights ran out, Winnipeg could have just told him to kick rocks. They could have just said, we have your rights until they expire. And if you want to just go play your junior and senior seasons at Michigan, declare yourself a pro, walk to free agency, you're free to do that. So they had to get something for him. And lastly, with this trade, this gets more into the meaning of it. This fits timelines better for both teams. Everybody, including us on this show, we love to do the who won a trade, who lost a trade. There are times when a trade is mutually beneficial, and this is mutually beneficial for both franchises. Brayden Yager is still a year or two away. The Winnipeg Jets, while they may not be near the top of the table in the Western Conference, they're still a contender. They don't need a guy who can step in right now and play right away. But keeping themselves in a contention window with young talent, Brayden Yager fits that window. Rutger McGroarty for the Penguins, they need a young, talented, tenacious player to bring some juice to this lineup. He's all of that and more. Now, we'll get into where he fits, if he's ready, all that later. But overall, I look at this trade, and it's hard for me to give, if I were to put a grade on it, an A, anything but an A for both teams. I think both general managers, Kevin Cheveldayoff as well as Kyle Dubas, both did extremely well in this one.
Yeah, I make fun of Kevin Cheveldayoff just because he really doesn't do that much. He got what he could out of this move. He could have gotten, I feel like, far less for Rutger McGroarty. The fact that he was able to get Yager is a pretty good coup from him. And the fact that the Penguins were also willingly able, to put Yager in that deal, I think should show everyone what they think of McGroarty. Because it felt like, at least from how the Penguins were talking, that Yager was untouchable to this front office. No, we're going to keep him. He's not going out in any trade. But I think it mainly had to be the perfect trade. And I think this was that for the Penguins to move on from Yager. But also, Pat, I feel like people don't realize just how good Rutger McGroarty is. Really good playmaker, has a nice shot, is fine defensively. The main thing that he does need to work on, I will say, is legit, is his skating. His skating is not up to par yet, but he's still only 20 years old. That can be worked on a little bit as he gets older. But this past season at Michigan, 16 goals, 52 points, in 36 games. Very solid production. At the World Juniors, 5 goals, 9 points in 7 games. Even the year before this past season, he had 18 goals, 39 points in 39 games. So he's been at a point per game level or above a point per game level in his 2 years at Michigan. That should translate over to the NHL level. And yes, they weren't acquiring him if they didn't know he was going to sign. That's the main thing here. He is going to push for a roster spot when training camp starts, and I do think he is going to make this team out of camp. Yeah, I know they have a lot of forwards on the roster right now, but I would be absolutely stunned if he is not on this team opening night. And with that, I do think you will definitely see more moves made at the forward position.
For sure. And building upon what I was saying, and you're right, the other thing to keep in mind here, and I know this is an intangible that people kind of hate to talk about. World Juniors this year, he was team captain. He was team captain of USA. And the World Junior Championship is not some ho-hum. It's not like the World Championships when all the guys who were knocked out of the Stanley Cup playoffs or didn't make the playoffs go and have a vacation somewhere nice and play some hockey along with it. That's a big tournament. That's where prospects make their name. That's where guys who have already been drafted prove that they're ready for the next level. So him putting up 9 points in 7 games as the American captain is huge. But also when it comes to fit and this trade being mutually beneficial, McGroarty's more of a winger. Yager, he goes back and forth between center and wing. And we've talked about it on this show. Yeah, we all went to sleep at night and dreamt of Brayden Yager being the next great winger for Sidney Crosby, but he slots more of as a center. And the Penguins roster, it's chock full of centers right now. So yeah, he could play wing, but at the end of the day, now that you have mostly a pure winger in McGroarty, this fits better.
See, I understand what you're saying. To me, I felt like Yager was more of a winger at this point in his career, someone who can play in the middle six. He can definitely be a center at some point, but I still see him right now more as a winger. McGroarty, though, I definitely agree with you. I think he's way more of a winger right now, but he can play center as well. He can play either winger position also. And just to go off what you were saying about his situation with Winnipeg, yeah, remember, he wanted to play with Winnipeg last year, but Winnipeg didn't have a spot for him when they were in the playoff race in the end of the playoffs. And that's when he was like, okay, if I'm not really going to have a spot here, I want you to trade me to a team where I know I'm going to have a shot to play. And the Penguins, obviously, he's going to have a great shot to play because, again, I do think he's going to make this team. Remember, people, there is a reason why he was a top 15 pick in the 2022 NHL draft. This is a move that helps the present and the future. A+ grade for me for Kyle Dubas, and I would also give an A grade for Winnipeg, considering that they got the Penguins' top prospect out of this, even though they could have gotten far less. But that'll do it for this first segment. Coming up in the second segment, Pat and I are going to discuss where McGroarty fits in the lineup. Is he going to be Crosby's winger this year and for years to come? Or is he going to be potentially on the third line with Kevin Hayes and maybe Anthony Beauvillier and those types of players? Well, we're going to discuss that in the second segment. But before we get to that, we have to tell you all about our first sponsor, and that is FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, which is America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you now through September 22nd. All FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Damp. So, Pat, where do you think McGroarty fits in for the Penguins lineup? Because I feel like it could kind of be all over the place. I could definitely see him playing with Crosby to start the year and maybe them bumping down O'Connor. Honestly, if I had to maybe take a stab at it, I think that's where they're leaning with this move. But again, I could also see O'Connor starting the season out on Crosby's wing and McGroarty starting out on the second or third line. As I just said, I could see him starting with Evgeny Malkin, maybe with Kevin Hayes. But if I had to take one guess at it, I'm going to say he starts the season with Sidney Crosby and Brian Rust on the top line. What say you?
That's where I am too, and I think that actually would suit this roster construction better, just because as much as I like Drew O'Connor, and I hope to eat these words, I hope he turns into a bona fide top 6 winger, because I'm a big fan of Drew O'Connor's game, but where it is right now in this moment, I think he's better suited for a middle 6 role, second or third line, rather than right on the top line. And if you look at the elite prospect scouting report for McGroarty, there's a line in there that it might as well just be the words ideal Sidney Crosby winger copied and pasted over and over again, where it says, and I'm quoting this from the elite prospects page, uses give and goes instead of deking and consistently occupies the space that maximizes his odds of getting the puck back. He's a bull too, relentlessly attacks the inside, combining skill and physicality. You know who that sounds like? Chris Kunitz.
Yep.
That is Chris Kunitz to a T. And you can laugh about Chris Kunitz and how he is another Mark Donk or whatever you want to call it, but that was the kind of game, and that is the kind of game that Chris Kunitz, Pascal Dupuis, Jake Gensel, players who have had a lot of success on Sidney Crosby's wing, that's how they play. They play a straight line game where they give Sid the puck, they let him cook, they go to a scoring area, and what do you know? The defense forgot about him in front, and he's got a goal. And looking at his game, his skating is definitely rough. He's not the fastest skater. He's not the most fleet of foot. But when you watch the way he plays the game, that scouting report summed it up. If you watch the film on him, it sums it up as well. He goes to scoring areas, and that is huge. And when you combine that with the fact that pretty much everywhere this kid has gone, he has found a way to produce, I would give him a shot on Sid's wing, see what happens. I also think that there's probably a world where Kyle Dubas and the coaching staff tell him, and I know people are going to hate this. There are going to be games where he might be a healthy scratch. There are going to be games where, in stretches where they might send him to Wilkes-Barre. And they're going to tell him, listen,
hopefully not.
You're going to play a lot of hockey at the NHL level this year, but you are not going to play an 82-game season. You are 20 years old. This is not the NCAA. You're going to play more than twice as many games in a season than you're used to playing. So we don't want to burn you out. We want to make sure you're ready to go and you're having the most optimal experience. So I think at the end of the day, I would give him a shot with Sid, but this is a classic case of a young kid who you are going to both have to manage your expectations for and manage his workload, because you do not want to burn him out and stunt his growth as a professional hockey player.
Right. And I do think that's fair. I don't think they're going to send him down to Wilkes-Barre at any point, especially if he makes the team. But I definitely could see them maybe making him a healthy scratch or two at times, considering that you're right, he doesn't have the experience of a full 82-game regular season in the NHL at this point. But man, I'm just fired up for this move overall, considering that this is the exact type of player that Kyle Dubas was also talking about acquiring after he did his moves on July 1. We kind of said the same about Cody Glass, that trade a little over a week ago, but this one also fits it to a T. A younger player with a lot of skill that can come in and help right now and into the future. And I also think with McGroarty, he does bring a little bit of Michael Bunting to his game a little bit, especially with the way he's able to go to the net, but he also low-key reminds me of Sam Bennett. He brings that same physicality that you see Bennett bring to the Florida Panthers. And are you noticing a bit of a trend to some of these players the Penguins are acquiring, Pat? Players that have a good amount of skill, but they also bring a little bit of ratty elements to their game. And I definitely think McGroarty has some ratty elements to his game, and I think he's going to become a fan favorite very quickly.
Say it with me, kids. What have the Penguins been missing for a while? Bastards.
Yep.
And Rutger McGroarty plays like a bastard.
He can bring a lot of hits, man. I've seen some of those highlights on his film. He can really lay the boom, and I know that's going to get a lot of fans excited during games.
This is not a small kid.
No.
He is already coming out of college, 6'1", 205. And when he comes to the NHL, he's going to have to bulk up because it's a little bit different than the NCAA. 6'1", 205, you're going to be an imposing figure in the NCAA. 6'1", 205 in the NHL, while you're not small, you're not big either. So this kid's going to have to pack on some muscle. He's going to have to be in the gym. He's going to have to change his diet. But if he does that, puts on 5-10 pounds, becomes 6'1", 210, 6'1", 215, puts on muscle, is able to work with the skating coaches and keeps that same style of play, he's, again, manage expectations here because it's a 20-year-old coming out of college. We have seen a lot of college phenoms and junior phenoms come to the NHL. They look like they're going to be the next big thing, and for whatever reason doesn't work, but all of the elements are in place for this kid to be a very solid top 6 NHL player for quite a while.
Right. I agree with you. And it's another reason to at least be decently excited about this team heading into the 24-25 season. But that'll do it for this second segment. Coming up to end the show, Pat and I are going to look at what this means for the rest of the forward group and who could be on the move heading into the season, just because when you look at the forward group right now, there's a lot of players vying for only a few spots, and that could mean some players could be on the move. Pat and I are going to discuss that to end the show. But before we get to that, we have to tell you all about our last sponsor, and that is Indeed. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Listeners of the show, you can get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. That's Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Damp. So, Pat, you look at the forward group for this team, not a lot of spots are available, but there's quite a few players going for those spots. We kind of had a similar segment last week when we talked about the Cody Glass trade, and he's going to be one of the players that's vying for one of these spots. Now you have McGroarty as well, and again, I do expect him to be on this team. You have Kevin Hayes coming in, Blake Lizotte. You obviously have Noel Acciari coming back, Lars Eller, Jesse Puljujarvi, Valtteri Puustinen. The list goes on and on and on and on. Matt Nieto, of course, but he's a bit banged up to start the year. What do you make of this forward group now? And could we see multiple moves coming from Kyle Dubas before the season starts in October?
I think at this point, you almost have to expect it, just because there are a lot of players here who you look at their roster, especially NHL level, where they're not the guys who are there. They're not AHL players. Are they great NHL players? Not really, but they're not going to have any purpose if you send them to the AHL, but there's not going to be room for them on the NHL roster. I also think this really continues to show us that it wouldn't shock me to see a Lars Eller move before we get to camp or in the middle of camp, just because he is arguably your most valuable asset at this point. He would fetch you a good enough return, whether it be draft picks, prospects, you name it, for a team that's really chasing a Stanley Cup this year, because he would be a very valuable fourth line player on a very affordable deal on a good team that produces. So I wouldn't be shocked to see that. I also am very curious to see what happens with Jesse Puljujarvi. I don't think they're going to trade him after signing him right away.
They might potentially start him in Wilkes-Barre this year, considering how crowded the forward group is. And I know that's probably not fair to him, and I know some fans might think that's nuts for me even saying that, but just when I look at the candidates for the bottom six right now, it feels like he might have to start down in the AHL to start the season.
Or you figure he would be part of a platoon of a couple of players that they don't play every single night. They slot in every 4 to 5 games. They kind of rotate as extras on the roster. But you're right. And the other way I see it is maybe, and I would hate to see this because I do think there is a world where Jesse Puljujarvi becomes a productive player for the Penguins, but you maybe could sell another general manager on hope with Jesse Puljujarvi. Hey, he's all the way back. He recovered from his hip surgeries. Yeah, we know he's not living up to the 4th overall pick reputation that he might have had, but you know, he's still going to be a solid NHL player. He's on a very affordable deal. We'll send it to you for, you know, pennies on the dollar and see what you can get us for it. So I look at that. And then I think about guys like Noel Acciari and even Matt Nieto, even though he's banged up. And there's value in those guys on other teams, just because I think about how many players we've seen over the past few years that the Penguins bring in and you think, man, this guy was solid everywhere else he went. And then for whatever reason, it just didn't work here. And those guys are trending in that direction, because I know, like, not so much Matt Nieto, but definitely when I saw they got Noel Acciari last year, I was very excited because he has been a very effective bottom 6 forward everywhere he's gone. And then obviously injuries derailed that and things got in the way, but maybe he bounces back this year. But again, there is now just a massive logjam for the bottom 2 lines.
Right. That's the best word to describe it. It is a logjam similar to the goaltender position now in the Penguin system, a big logjam at both. Honestly, we can maybe do a small argument for defensively as well, considering how some of the moves they've made, during this offseason. I mean, I look at the lineup potentially right now, McGroarty with maybe Brian Rust and Sidney Crosby, Michael Bunting with Evgeny Malkin, Ricard Raquel, something like Drew Connor with Kevin Hayes, maybe Valtteri Pustin on the third line, Anthony Beauvillier. Then you have Blake Lizotte on the fourth line with Puljujarvi, Achari, Cody Glass, etc. I do think Achari could potentially be traded, but I also have a feeling that the organization really values him, especially on the penalty kill. I still think Eller is most likely to go, considering I do think you could get back something like a mid-round pick and a prospect, or just one of those two things for Eller, considering the year that he just had for the Penguins. And I do think he could help a contender or just any team in the bottom six overall. So I do see at least one of those two being moved, but I could also see multiple being moved. Maybe they do trade Achari to a team and get a mid-round pick also, or a prospect back. Maybe they find a taker for Nieto just because it feels like that experiment hasn't worked out and he's going to be a bit banged up to start the year. They have a lot of questions they have to answer between now and training camp. And speaking of training camp, Pat, it's going to be a lot of fun to follow this year. There's been a lot of Penguins training camps where I feel like there hasn't been too many storylines to follow. It feels like it's been boring. That won't be the case for this year.
No, this is going to be, especially on defense and in the bottom six, a competitive camp. Yeah. This is going to be a year where you pretty much know there's one spot open in the top six, and that is on Crosby's wing. And I wouldn't be shocked if Mike Sullivan and Kyle Dubas have everybody in the top six: Crosby, Malkin, Raquel, Rust, Bunting written in permanent marker, but Drew O'Connor's written in dry erase marker. And everybody in the bottom six, dry erase marker. Everybody on defense, for the most part, outside of Carlson, Letang, and Pettersson, is written in dry erase marker, because these guys are going to have to earn spots. And this is not, like you said, one of those Penguins training camps of the past where you go, all right, with the exception of one or two surprises, we know who's going to play on what line and who's going to make the team and who's going to be the starting goalie. We know it. Let's just get to October so we can watch real hockey. No, we know 5 of the 6 in the top 6. Everything else is up for grabs.
Right. And then I think for the bottom 6, I feel like we know some of the spots that are locked down. I think Kevin Hayes definitely has a spot locked down. I would probably say Anthony Beauvillier has a spot full-time, considering he just signed. Maybe I'm trying to think who else definitely has a spot.
But even then, you know that those guys are going to be in the bottom 6.
Right.
But you don't know where they're going to play yet.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I would think Pustin has a spot, but he's also going to have to earn it. I will say, I think Lizotte definitely has a spot locked down, but I feel like for the bottom 6, there's at least 3 spots that players are going to be jockeying for overall. And I'm really excited to see what happens overall. But I think that'll do it for today's episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. We were supposed to go on Friday, but Kyle Dubas was like, no, your guys are going to go on Thursday, do an emergency episode. So we did that. But assuming nothing happens on Friday, there's no Sidney Crosby extension news or anything like that, Pat and I will be back with a fresh episode for you all on Monday, talk more about this trade and maybe other things regarding the Pittsburgh Penguins. But until then, I'm Hunter Hodes. That is Patrick Damp. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and we will talk with you all on Monday.